Bitcoin's using all the electricity and killing the planet, right? I mean, that's the headline you see everywhere.
Yeah, it's definitely a common take.
But what if that narrative isn't quite the full picture?
Welcome to the deep dive. We sift through stacks of information to pull out the insights that matter for you. Think of it as your shortcut to being in the know, without all the noise.
Exactly. And today we're digging into a presentation, one you actually attended, right?
Yeah.
All about Bitcoin's energy use.
That's right. It was, well, pretty eye-opening. But first things first, they kicked off with some really important disclaimers we should echo here.
Absolutely. Stuff like, this isn't financial advice, you got to do your own research.
And crucially, never invest more than you can actually afford to lose. Standard, but vital in this space.
Couldn't agree more. So to tackle the energy question, the presentation actually took a step back.
Yeah, it started with something really fundamental. What even is money?
It sounds almost too simple, doesn't it? But it's key. And they used a quote from John Terry Barlow.
Oh, right. Money is the ultimate social fiction. It's the way we convince each other to do things. Barlow, the internet freedom guy, EFF co-founder.
Yeah, a real thinker about these networked systems. And that quote, it really gets at the core, doesn't it? Money works because we collectively agree it works. It's a shared belief.
Totally. So from that idea of social agreement, the presentation then laid out the ideal properties of money.
Right, the functions it needs to serve, like a medium of exchange, easy to trade with, a unit of account so we know what things are worth.
A store of value holding its purchasing power over time, and a standard of deferred payment for loans and such.
Exactly. And then the characteristics that help it do those jobs well.
Like durability, it shouldn't fall apart. Divisibility, you need to make change.
Fungibility, $1 is the same as another dollar. Scarcity can't just make infinite amounts of it.
Yeah.
And recognizability, you got to know it's real.
And gold and silver, they fit the bill pretty well for a long, long time on most of those counts.
For sure. And to show why those matter, they contrasted it with simple barter. Remember the example?
Oh, yeah. The turnip guy wanting a goat, but the goat owner wants pottery. It sounds like a total mess.
It highlights the double coincidence of wants problem. You need to find someone who has what you want and wants what you have. Super inefficient.
Right. What a headache. So after barter came commodity money. Shells, salt, grain.
Exactly. Things with some inherent usefulness, or maybe more importantly, things that took effort to get.
Mm-hmm.
The presentation linked this to proof of work.
Ah, that's interesting. The effort involved in finding shells or mining metals gave them value?
Precisely. And they dropped that cool etymology fact about salary.
Oh, yeah, from salarium, the salt allowance for Roman soldiers. Crazy how far back these connections go.
Isn't it? Then came coinage, standardized metal, easier to trade, easier to account for. Mesopotamia, Greece, Rome.
A huge step.
Definitely streamlined things.
Yeah.
Then eventually, paper money. Starting in China, right? 7th century.
Yeah, the Tang Dynasty's jiaozi, basically IOUs for metal held elsewhere, representative money.
Which then evolved over centuries into what we have now, fiat money.
Right.
Fiat just means let it be done. Its value isn't tied to gold or anything physical. It's just declared valuable by the government.
Because I said so money.
Pretty much. The lecturer mentioned China's early experiments, but it really took off globally in the 20th century. Think central banks like the U.S. Federal Reserve, set up in 1913, and now, of course, most of our money is both digital and fiat.
Which leads us right to the abandonment of the gold standard. The lecture outlined how World War I put pressure on it, then FDR's actions in 1933.
Right, confiscating private gold.
Mm-hmm. Then the Bretton Woods system, after World War II and 44, trying to peg currencies to the dollar, which was pegged to gold.
Kind of a hybrid system.
And then Nixon's 1971 shock boom, the U.S. completely cut the dollar's tie to gold. The lecture also touched on the petrodollar system as a sort of subsequent mechanism propping up the U.S. dollar's global status.
That shift really fundamentally changed the whole basis of our monetary system. We moved away from, tangible scarcity towards government decree and, frankly, geopolitical influence.
Exactly. And this brings us to that key contrast between hard money and fiat money.
Mm-hmm.
So it really drew that clear line. Hard money, like gold, scarce and costly to make, versus fiat money, easy to create, relies on trust.
A crucial distinction. And that led nicely into a closer look at gold itself, not just accepting it as the standard.
Yeah, that was interesting. They started with the classic view, J.P. Morgan, gold is money, everything else is credit.
The traditional bedrock perspective.
But then boom, Warren Buffett's take.
Oh, that's great. Gold gets dug out, melted down, buried again. People guard it. It has no utility.
Huh. Such a practical, almost dismissive view from a giant like Buffett. It definitely makes you think twice about gold's intrinsic value.
It really does. It highlights how much of its value is just convention and belief. And then they brought up recent news.
The Perth Mint thing, selling diluted gold, the alleged cover-up, that sort of chips away at the whole incorruptible image, doesn't it? And then the truly kind of mind-bending idea of asteroid 16's Psyche, potentially holding, what was the number?
10,000 quadrillion dollars worth of precious metals.
Right. Suddenly the whole concept of gold's absolute scarcity feels a bit shaky, doesn't it?
Totally. And that is the perfect setup.
And that perfectly sets the stage for the dawn of a new era. Decentralized money, a new form of money not relying on governments or gold or central banks, but purely on math and code.
This is just a radical departure, really, from that whole historical trajectory of money we just outlined. Bitcoin proposed a fundamentally different foundation for value and exchange.
So after that whirlwind history tour, the lecture shifted focus to a really fundamental requirement for any money, keeping it secure.
Right.
It emphasized that money has to be protected not just physically, from being stolen,
In space, so to speak.
right, in space, but also over time maintaining its value.
Security through time, preventing value erosion.
And historically, how have we done that? We've relied on central authorities, kings, governments, banks, these trusted custodians.
Right.
And ultimately, their power to safeguard money and control its supply rests on force, doesn't it?
Yep.
Walls, armies, police, the legal system, the ability to enforce their rules.
That Thomas Jefferson quote really hit home. Banking establishments are more dangerous than standing armies.
Wow. He saw the power concentrated in finance even back then. The potential for control, maybe even coercion, inherent in controlling the money.
Yeah, he clearly got that the system wasn't just based on politeness. The speaker basically framed it as traditional money being secured by force, kinetic energy. The state's monopoly on violence, essentially.
It's a stark way to put it, but arguably accurate. The laws, the enforcement, the stability that allows fiat currency to function it ultimately rests on that state power. Which leads to the big question, what if scarcity wasn't about digging stuff up? What if money could be scarce just because it's built into code?
Digital scarcity.
Precisely. A totally new paradigm. Decentralized money based on math and code, not governments or gold.
Then, this anonymous figure, or group, Satoshi Nakamoto, appears out of nowhere.
Still mysterious, right? No one knows who they really are.
Still a mystery.
The white paper dropped October 31st, 2008.
Right in the thick of the financial crisis. The timing wasn't accidental.
Definitely not.
Uh-huh.
On a cryptography mailing list. And what's striking is the complete lack of any traditional launch. No marketing, no VC funding, just an idea shared with a niche group of cryptographers.
It was a genuinely organic, bottom-up kind of thing.
Ah.
Driven by the tech and this shared desire for something different financially.
And then that Genesis block, January 3rd, 2009, so symbolic. Embedding the Times headline, Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks.
Such a statement.
It wasn't just a timestamp, it felt like a direct comment on the traditional financial system's failings right then. And the other headline mentioned about Israel and Gaza, just a sort of somber reflection on these recurring global cycles.
Right. So Bitcoin really emerged from that climate of distrust in specific events. And it's built on these core ideas, transacting directly, peer-to-peer, no middleman.
Right.
Resisting censorship, potential for financial inclusion for anyone, privacy.
Right.
It's just fundamentally different from having these central authorities calling all the shots.
Exactly. And for years, a huge hurdle for digital cash was the double spending problem. How do you stop someone spending the same digital coin twice without a central bank keeping tabs?
Right, like copying an MP3 file.
Kind of, yeah. Bitcoin's big innovation was solving this in a decentralized way, and it also introduced real, verifiable digital scarcity.
Before Bitcoin, digital stuff wasn't really scarce. You could copy files, songs, photos endlessly for basically zero cost.
Yeah, infinite copies.
Bitcoin changed that. It created a digital asset with a strictly limited supply, 21 million coins ever, enforced by the code itself. That was a game changer.
It really was.
So how does it stay secure without a central authority? That was the deep dive part. Well, it relies on a trustless ledger, meaning you don't have to trust any single person or company, just the system itself.
Okay.
Every transaction is publicly recorded in this shared history, the blockchain. And this history is enforced by consensus. Thousands of independent computers called nodes running the software all agree on the state of the ledger.
So everyone has a copy, basically.
Yeah. or access to verify it. And once a transaction is confirmed in a block, it's essentially immutable, can't be changed, can't be erased. Plus, transactions are processed in order, preventing double spending.
Okay, so no central authority, no double spending, just math and this distributed agreement. But why would anyone bother running these nodes or doing the verification work? What's the incentive? This is really clever. Game theory and economic incentives. The system is designed so that it's actually more profitable for participants to act honestly and follow the rules than it is to try and cheat.
It's this ingenious incentive mechanism.
Hmm.
It aligns everyone's individual self-interest wanting to earn rewards with the overall security and integrity of the network. Cheating is designed to be unprofitable.
The lecture then detailed the role of the miners. They're the ones validating transactions, maintaining this ledger, and competing to add the next block to the chain.
And for doing that work.
They get rewarded with newly created Bitcoin and transaction fees. It explained the proof-of-work mechanism, this computational race. Miners use massive amounts of computing power to solve a complex cryptographic puzzle. The first one to solve it gets to create the next valid block.
Which happens, on average, about every 10 minutes.
Right. Think of it like a global lottery where you buy tickets with computing power trying to solve a really hard math problem.
And proof of work is the energy-intensive core of Bitcoin security. That computational effort, that energy spent, is what makes it incredibly expensive and difficult for anyone to try and cheat or rewrite the transaction history.
And to keep that block time consistent, around 10 minutes, the lecture explained the difficulty adjustment. The hardness of that cryptographic puzzle automatically adjusts every 2 weeks or so. It goes up if miners are solving blocks too quickly, down if they're too slow. It's based on how much total computing power is on the network. It's a self-regulating system.
This dynamic adjustment keeps the pace of block creation and new Bitcoin issuance steady, regardless of how many miners join or leave the network.
Now, the lecture also mentioned the theoretical 51% attack. What's that about?
Okay, so in theory, if one person or group somehow controlled more than half, 51% of the network's total computing power, they could potentially cause trouble.
Like what kind of trouble?
They might be able to block certain transactions from getting confirmed, or maybe even double spend their own coins, spend them once, then use their majority power to reverse that transaction and spend them again.
Okay. Could they steal other people's Bitcoin?
No, that's the key thing. They couldn't steal Bitcoin from other people's wallets or change old, already confirmed transactions deep in the blockchain. And importantly, launching such an attack would be incredibly expensive. You'd need massive amounts of specialized hardware and electricity.
So it's probably not worth it.
Generally, yeah.
Yeah.
The lecture argued that it's almost always more profitable for miners to just play by the rules and keep earning the block rewards honestly, rather than trying to attack the network, which would likely crash the price of Bitcoin anyway.
So the security comes from the tech, but also the economic incentives are designed to keep people honest.
Precisely. It's designed so that cooperation is the most rewarding strategy. And as the lecture highlighted, this whole system, decentralized security, powered by electricity, driven by collaboration, it's a fundamental shift from that old model of security through kinetic force and potential violence.
Security through peaceful collaboration, as they put it.
Yeah. Okay, so now we got the background on Bitcoin itself.
Which naturally leads us right into the heart of the controversy, that energy cost.
Okay, so we understand why it uses energy for security, for decentralization, for enforcing scarcity. Now, let's tackle the big question. How much energy and what does it mean for climate change? We've all seen those headlines.
No, yeah, some were pretty wild, weren't they?
Totally. They showed some classics, that prediction from a few years back saying Bitcoin mining was on track to consume all of the world's energy by 2020.
Which, spoiler alert, didn't happen.
Right, didn't happen. Or that calculus headline comparing it to a giant Chernobyl exploding in the heart of Silicon Valley. I mean, talk about dramatic.
It certainly grabs attention, but it also highlights the level of genuine concern out there. And it's not just sensationalist media, right?
Oh, definitely not.
They mentioned the Weizmann Institute's warning in 2020 about the potential harm outweighing the good.
And then, of course, Elon Musk. May 2021, Tesla had bought billions in Bitcoin, started accepting it.
And then suddenly stopped.
Yeah, citing the rapidly increasing use of fossil fuels in mining and environmental concerns. That really pushed the issue into the mainstream consciousness.
It absolutely did. But, okay, let's try to look past the headlines and get into the actual numbers and the context like the lecture did. As of, say, May 2025, the network's computing power is just staggering. Around 926 exahashes per second.
which is 926 quintillion hashes per second. Quintillion.
That's nearly a sextillion.
That number is just hard to grasp.
Yeah, it's hard to even imagine. The lecture compared it to the estimated number of stars in the observable universe, about 10 sextillion. Bitcoin's doing a noticeable fraction of that calculation-wise every second.
That's unbelievable. And they also mentioned the El Capitan supercomputer, one of the world's fastest, at 1.7 exaflops.
Right?
The Bitcoin network performs computations equivalent to over 500 of those every second. It's almost impossible to wrap your head around that scale.
It really is. And all that computation needs power. The estimate cited, based on the Cambridge Index, was about 189 terawatt hours per year.
Okay. And the comparison given was South Africa.
Roughly equivalent to South Africa's total annual electricity consumption, yeah. Which, on its own, sounds massive.
It does. But then came the context. Total world electricity consumption is over 25,000 terawatt hours a year.
Right.
So Bitcoin's share is only about 0.74% of global electricity use. And if you look at total global energy use, all forms, it drops even lower to like 0.29%.
Exactly. Suddenly, it seems like a much smaller slice of the overall energy pie.
So perspective matters.
The lecture also compared Bitcoin's electricity use to individual countries, placing it somewhere between, I think, Egypt and South Africa in terms of annual usage, and it raised an important point. Unlike a country's energy use, which powers everything homes, hospitals, factories, Bitcoin's energy use is solely dedicated to securing the network. And it's transparent, borderless, and totally voluntary.
That transparency is key. It allows for much more focused analysis and debate about its purpose and efficiency compared to, say, the often opaque energy consumption of entire nations.
The lecture then offered another interesting comparison, Bitcoin's energy use versus gold mining.
Okay.
Gold mining apparently uses around 131 terawatt hours per year. So Bitcoin's usage is currently higher, yes, but the lecture highlighted the different nature of the environmental impact.
How so?
Well, Bitcoin mining doesn't involve, tearing up landscapes, using toxic chemicals like cyanide for leaching, that kind of thing associated with a lot of gold extraction.
That's a fair point. Environmental impact isn't just about electricity use. It has many dimensions.
Here's where the lecture took a really interesting turn, shifting the perspective. It highlighted the huge amount of energy that's just lost or wasted in our existing systems.
Oh, like transmission losses.
Exactly. The U.S. alone apparently loses over 200 terawatt hours of electricity every year just through transmission and distribution inefficiencies. That's more than enough to power the entire Bitcoin network.
Wow. Okay.
And globally, an estimated 700 terawatt hours of energy potential is wasted each year through gas flaring at oil and gas sites, enough to power Bitcoin almost 4 times over.
So much wasted energy.
The lecture called it an energy opportunity, more than just an energy problem, which leads into the economics and the incentives driving how Bitcoin gets powered.
Because miners need cheap electricity to make a profit.
Right.
Hardware is expensive, competition is fierce.
Exactly. Constant pressure. Their profit margin is directly tied to the cost of electricity. So there's this relentless economic incentive to find the absolute cheapest power sources available.
And increasingly, the cheapest sources long-term are
Renewables. Solar, wind, hydro, geothermal, high setup costs maybe, but then the fuel, sun, wind, water is free. So this pure economic self-interest is pushing more and more miners towards renewable energy hubs.
So it's less about being green for the sake of it and more about the bottom line driving a greener outcome.
Pretty much. But the result is the same, a growing share of mining powered by renewables. And the lecture highlighted some unique things about mining that make it a good fit for renewables. It can be turned on and off easily, so it handles intermittent power.
Unlike, say, a factory that needs constant power.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's portable. You can literally put mining rigs in shipping containers and move them anywhere, and it can operate completely off-grid.
These attributes make Bitcoin mining a uniquely flexible energy consumer. It can use energy that might not be suitable or economic for traditional industry or homes.
The lecture discussed the energy timing problem. Demand fluctuates through the day, but renewable production, like solar, is intermittent. This often leads to times when there's way more renewable energy being produced than needed.
Right, negative prices sometimes. What do you do with the excess?
Exactly. Bitcoin miners, with their flexible, interruptible demand, can act as instant buyers for that excess power, helping to stabilize the grid and make renewables more economical.
That ability to soak up surplus renewable energy could really improve the economics of renewable projects and lead to a more stable, efficient grid overall.
It gave a real-world example. Japan's TEPCO, a huge utility company, partnering with miners to use surplus renewable energy specifically to improve their grid efficiency.
Practical applications. It's not just theory.
And then there's this amazing story of the Mechanicville hydroelectric plant in New York, built in 1897.
Wow, old school hydro.
It was apparently on the verge of being shut down, but now it's
Yes.
thriving by mining Bitcoin with its clean hydropower, reportedly earning 3 times more than it did just selling electricity to the grid.
That's a fantastic illustration. Bitcoin mining reviving century-old renewable infrastructure, creating new value from something underutilized.
The lecture also talked about stranded energy. Think remote areas with, say, huge wind or geothermal potential, but no transmission lines to get the power to cities.
Right, lots of energy, nowhere for it to go.
Bitcoin mining can be deployed right there at the source, monetizing energy that would otherwise be completely wasted. Examples given were places like Iceland, remote parts of Texas, El Salvador.
By putting mining right at the energy source, it becomes economically viable to harness energy that's just stranded due to lack of infrastructure.
It also discussed Bitcoin mining's potential to set a kind of floor price for energy.
How does that work?
By acting as a guaranteed buyer of last resort for any excess power, especially from new renewable projects, this makes those projects less risky financially from day one.
Ah, I see. Knowing you have a buyer, even if the grid doesn't need it right then, de-risks the investment.
Exactly, which could incentivize more investment in renewables and even help develop off-grid solutions.
That guaranteed demand could definitely lower the financial barriers for building more renewables.
The lecture even detailed how mining could help develop rural microgrids in places with no electricity access, still over 770 million people globally.
Wow.
By providing that crucial initial consistent demand. It solves the chicken-egg problem. Why build power infrastructure if there are no initial customers? Miners can be that first customer, making the investment viable. It mentioned a company called Gridless in East Africa doing this with microhydro in Kenya.
That application is fascinating, bringing clean energy and economic opportunity to energy-poor communities through mining.
Right. Using small-scale Bitcoin mining operations to anchor the economics of new off-grid microgrids in rural villages. They set up a small hydro plant in Kenya, sell most of the power locally.
Bringing electricity to communities for the first time.
Exactly. But they use the excess capacity, or sell power during off-peak times, to the Bitcoin miners on site. That mining revenue helps pay for the whole project, making electrification affordable where it otherwise wouldn't be.
Turning Bitcoin mining into a development tool. Wow.
Finally, the lecture explored the huge opportunity in waste capture, specifically flare gas from oil fields.
Ah, the methane problem.
Oil and gas drilling often produces natural gas as a byproduct. If there's no pipeline nearby, companies often just burn it off, flare it. It's wasteful and polluting, releasing CO2 and often unburnt methane, which is a potent greenhouse gas.
Right.
But you can capture that flare gas, run it through a generator on site, and use the electricity to power Bitcoin miners. Instead of burning it for nothing, you turn a waste product into value.
And it's cleaner than just flaring it.
Generally, yes. Modern generators combust the gas more efficiently than an open flare, significantly reducing methane emissions. They showed setups doing this in Texas, and mentioned even ExxonMobil is exploring using excess gas for mining.
So that vision they painted of a modern oil field design where captured gas powers operations, including mining, and maybe even the CO2 is captured and used, that's actually feasible.
It's starting to happen, integrating energy production, use, and waste mitigation in a much smarter way.
And linking this back to another environmental problem, those millions of unplugged, abandoned oil and gas wells across the U.S.
Yeah, over 2 million of them just leaking methane constantly, a huge overlooked source of greenhouse gas emissions. They said it's equivalent to burning over 16 million barrels of oil a year.
Could Bitcoin mining help there too?
Potentially. If some of those wells still produce enough low-flow gas, maybe capturing it for on-site mining could provide the economic incentive needed to finally plug the wells properly or at least manage the emissions. It's an idea being explored.
Okay, so pulling it all together then, this deep dive, based on what we just heard, we went way back, traced the history of money to see where Bitcoin fits.
Right. Context is key.
We looked at how Bitcoin secures itself, math, decentralization, proof-of-work energy, contrasting it with traditional finance's reliance on centralization, and ultimately, force. and then tackling the energy question head on, the picture that emerged is just
Well, it's way more complex and nuanced than the simple Bitcoin is boiling the oceans narrative, isn't it?
definitely. What really stands out is how the core economics are pushing miners towards renewables over 50% already, according to the estimates they shared, and likely growing,
Driven by costs.
driven by the hunt for the cheapest power. And beyond that, we saw these tangible opportunities using mining to enable wider access to electricity, like with Gridless, promoting financial inclusion and helping solve tricky energy problems like stranded power and waste gas. And that potentially counterintuitive point that Bitcoin mining could actually strengthen the business case for building more renewable energy by acting as that flexible buyer of last resort. That was a surprising takeaway for me.
It challenges conventional thinking, for sure.
So at the end of the day, Bitcoin's energy use,
Yeah.
it's not a simple good or bad story, is it?
Not at all. There are no easy answers here. Yes, it consumes a significant amount of energy, and we need to be mindful of the sources. But it also seems to present these genuinely transformative possibilities for evolving our energy infrastructure, maybe even making it more sustainable and efficient in some ways.
It definitely challenges those initial assumptions most of us probably walked in with. It leaves you thinking, doesn't it? Maybe the real question isn't just how much energy Bitcoin uses, but how it uses it and what that unique energy demand could unlock. Something to chew on as you explore this further yourself.